He's the most wonderful character. I'm going to read two bits from Vis and Ramin. As I say, the poem is a love poem. It's a love poem like all love poems in which there are great obstacles to love. It is almost certainly one of the sources of the Tristan and Isolde story. Actually, I was recently in Ireland, and I gave a paper on this, and you can imagine how that went down in Ireland. They were not very keen on this idea. They were very polite, but I could see they were thinking, oh, yeah, right. Anyway, but it really is. I mean, when you put the two poems together, I think it's undeniable. And Vis and Ramin was written about a little over 100 years before the first appearance of the Tristan story in Europe. And in that 100 years, the First Crusade ended and the Crusaders went home. So there you are, that's how it got. I'm going to read two bits. One is, there's a nurse who's very like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, if you know Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, who's this kind of amoral go-between, who just wants to get the lovers into bed and doesn't really care about the morality of anything. The nurse in Vis and Ramin is like that too. In fact, it's a standard figure. It comes from Greek comedy, and it finishes up in lots of European and Middle Eastern literatures, this amoral nurse who facilitates the coming together of lovers. And the point I'm going to read you, Vis has already been married twice. The first time she's been married, I tell you this because the names come up in the bit I'm going to read. The first time she's been married to a man called Viru, who is also her brother, but we won't go into that. We'll leave that aside. The second time she is married to a man called Obayd, who's the man she's married to at the moment when the bit I'm going to read you is happening. Obayd is much, much older than her and she can't stand him. Although she's been married twice, she still hasn't slept with anybody. So she's still a virgin, which in this kind of poem, it's a necessity that the woman sleep for the first time with her real love, not with somebody else. Why she's still a virgin is too complicated to go into, but she is. Okay, this is the nurse trying to persuade Vis to look with favor on Ramin. Ramin has seen Vis, and he's got hold of the nurse, and he has been sending letters to Vis through the nurse. Vis has refused to have anything to do with Ramin, and refuses to even look when he's in the room, or to have, she says, I'm not going to have it, I'm married, it's true I hate my husband, but I'm not going to commit adultery, I'm not doing anything wrong. Leave me alone. And she goes, and the nurse keeps trying different arguments, and Vis remains steadfast. This is one of the nurse's arguments. Vis has just said to the nurse, forget it, I'm not going to do it. The nurse comes back. Now when the nurse saw Vis's furious face and heard her talk of heaven and God's grace, she searched within her scheming heart to find some means to soothe her charge's troubled mind. Her demon did not rest, but wondered how Vis and Ramin could be united now, and how like fat and sugar they could be blended entirely and inseparably. Then one by one the sly nurse recollected all the old tricks and spells that she'd collected. And when she spoke, her voice was lovelier than the frescoes at Naushad. The nurse began, "You're dearer to me than my soul, more blessed and virtuous even than I'd guessed. May you seek justice always, may you stay truthful and honoured, wise in every way. Why should I need or want, dear Vis, to grieve you? What fear or greed could drive me to deceive you? Why should I want to trick you? I'm not trying to steal from you. Why should I think of lying? Ramin is not my brother or my son. And can you tell me what it is he's done to make me favour him, so that I'd be his faithful friend and your sworn enemy? I only want one thing from life, that you find happiness in everything you do, and that your reputation stay intact. But I must tell you an undoubted fact. You are a woman, not a demon, not a fairy, houri, or I don't know what. Viru has gone, and as for Obayd, well, he's been disposed of by a clever spell. No one's enjoyed your body, no one can. You've never truly slept with any man. You've had no joy of men. You've never known a man whom you could really call your own. You've married twice, but each time you've moved on, both husbands crossed the river and they're gone. But if you want a man, I've never seen a finer specimen than this Ramin. What use is beauty if it doesn't bless your life with pleasure and love's happiness? You're innocent, you're in the dark about it. You don't know how forlorn life is without it. Women were made for men, dear Vis, and you are not exempt, whatever you might do. The well-born women of the world delight in marrying a courtier or a knight, and some who have a husband also see a special friend who's sworn to secrecy. She loves her husband, she embraces him, and then her happy friend replaces him. You can have royal riches beyond measure, brocades and jewels and every kind of treasure, but joy is something that you won't discover until you have a husband or a lover. If you need riches, it's to make you more attractive to him than you were before. What use are all your red and yellow dresses, unless they lead to kisses and caresses? If you can see this, it was wrong of you to slander me, when all I said is true. I spoke maternally, and as your nurse, I'm trying to make things better now, not worse. Ramin is worthy of you, and I've seen that you, dear Vis, are worthy of Ramin. You are the sun, and he's the moon. If he is like an elegant, tall cypress tree, you are a bough of blossoms in the spring. If you are milk, he's wine. In everything you're worthy of each other's love, and I will never grieve again until I die, if I can see love mutually requited, while you and he are happily united. And gradually, the heart of Vis was stirred and softened by the arguments she heard. I was going to read you another bit from Vis and Ramin. I was going to read you the bit where they actually get together and go to bed for the first time, but you'll have to get the book. Because I'm going to move on and read a new book which I'm working on at the moment, which I haven't published yet, is poems by three poets who lived in the 14th century in Shiraz. And these three poets, they're very different from each other, but they certainly knew each other. One poet is the most famous woman poet from medieval Iran, Jahan Khatun, whose father and then whose uncle were the rulers of Shiraz. And then they were killed in a coup d'etat. And Jahan Khatun's uncle was a person who organized poetic gatherings to which we know one of the other poets, Hafez, came. So Hafez, and Jahan Khatun, in her poems, she quite often quotes Hafez. So we know Hafez and Jahan Khatun knew each other. The other poet, none of whose poems I'm going to read today, is Obayd Zakani, who's the most famous obscene poet of medieval Iran. And he too was in Shiraz at the same time. It was a very small town. It was estimated it was about 60,000 people in the 14th century. He too was part of this royal poetic circle, and he will have taken part in these gatherings too. And we also have two poems by Obayd Zakani about Jahan Khatun, both of which are obscene, by the way, which is interesting that he was able to sort of circulate his poems and get away with it. Obviously nobody bothered about it. I'm going to read some poems by Jahan Khatun, this princess whose family lost power when she was in her early 20s. Her poems divide pretty well into two kinds. They're either very aristocratic, elegant, charming, rather frivolous love poems, or they're clearly poems from after she's lost power, when she's very bitter and angry about the way things have gone. And I'll read a couple of each kind. It's, she plays, the convention is that a man is writing a poem. Poems are always written by men. One of the interesting things about Jahan Khatun is that we have the preface to her collected poems written by her, in which she says, poems are always written by men. And I know that it's daring of me and wrong of me to write poems. Nevertheless, the following women poets have written. And that paragraph is almost like a poem in itself, because she gives us the names of all these women poets who have completely disappeared from history, almost none of whose poems have survived. Most of them, we don't have any poems by them. A couple of them, we have a few poems. And she plays with this convention that in theory a man is writing the poem when everybody knows it's a woman writing the poem. She plays with lots of other conventions too. It's a convention of these poems that the lover always complains of the infidelity, the cruelty, the nastiness, the distance of the beloved. We don't know how autobiographical this is or how conventional. Jahan Khatun has literally hundreds of these poems. Her complete works runs to well over 1,500 poems. And we have two manuscripts of the complete works, the lot. Okay, this is one of them. You don't know how you ought to treat a lover. Not for a moment do you think of me. My heart is broken and it won't recover, since you won't show me any sympathy. Your only way is to be pitiless. Your only path's the path of tyranny. You don't acknowledge my long faithfulness, since you've no interest in fidelity. You spend all night asleep or drunk, and give no thought at all to sleepless weeping me. And what use are my tears, since all you live for is to be spiteful and act thoughtlessly? I didn't know that when you swore your oath, your yes was all that I was going to hear. You don't care for Jahan. While I gave both my world and soul into your hands, my dear. Submit, my heart, and learn to tolerate this grief, since you will find no other fate. I'll read 3 or 4 poems by Jahan, and then I'll read some poems by Hafez. Jahan is untranslated, so when this book comes out, there'll be the first versions of Jahan, I think in any Western language, certainly in English. There are an awful lot of poems, like the one I've just read, so I won't read. Well, I'll read some short poems for him. In the first poem, a Sufi is a Muslim mystic. Again, like Masati, the woman poet I read a couple of poems from before, she can be very pathetic or she can be quite witty. And her short poems, they do both. She's more often witty, though, in the short ones than the long ones. These are a few short ones. I swore I'd never look at him again. I'd be a Sufi, deaf to sin's temptations. I saw my nature wouldn't stand for it. From now on, I renounce renunciations. Last night, my love, my life, you lay with me. I grasped your pretty chin. I fondled it. And then I bit and bit your sweet lips till I woke. It was my fingertip I bit. My love's an ache no ointments can allay now. My soul's on fire. How long you've been away now. I said, I will be patient while he's gone. But that's impossible. It's one whole day now.